Good afternoon and good morning to all of those of you that have joined us today. We're just going to wait 30 seconds or so just to settle in, and we will start today's webinar. So we'll just give it 30 seconds or so and then we'll start. But thank you for joining us so far. Always the longest 30 seconds. I can never stay quiet. I can see more and more people join us today. So thank you once again for joining us, and we'll start shortly. We'll just wait for everyone to settle in. Okay, so guys, everyone ready? Today's webinar is ensuring global payroll success in a work from anywhere future. So obviously things have changed so much over the last couple of years. My name is Melanie Pitsey and I am the CEO of the Global Payroll Association. Just to let you all know, this session is recorded and will be made available after today's session. We will send you a note just to let you know that it is available or when it is available. We would love this session to be really interactive, so please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box or the Q&A, and then we will get to those towards the end of the webinar. So, please ask questions as we go along. Okay, so we have a great panel with us today. We're going to start off with Rick. Hi, Rick, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Melanie. Rick Hamill, CEO and founder of Elements Global Services. First and foremost, my background's in HR. Prior to Elements, I ran government contracts for Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and Japan with the US government on $1 billion contract, but really focusing on, people strategy, global operations, and post-COVID, it's the perfect time to talk about it, remote work. So I'm super excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. And then we have Caroline. Caroline can make us feel jealous for all those that are from the UK. She's based in Barcelona. But over to you, Caroline.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Caroline Aurora. I'm the VP of People and Culture at Blinkist, which is a tech company based from Berlin, which provides resources for people to understand powerful ideas in little bite-sized formats, which are entertaining. As Melanie said, I'm British, but I live in Barcelona, and I work for a German company. So truly a work from anywhere background myself. And prior to Blinkist, I worked also for government outsourcing in people and culture teams.
Thank you, Caroline. So let's start, shall we? So we're going to start off with a poll. So I said this was going to be interactive, so it'd be great to hear from all of you. So I'm going to start off with the first poll. So I'm just going to launch that. And the poll is, have you experienced turnover due to employee relocations during the pandemic? Caroline and Rick, what's your thoughts on this? Do you think this is going to be a high yes or a high no?
Well, I'm going to say yes. A number of our clients, especially from an EOR perspective, clients have called us randomly and said, hey, I just had an employee tell me that they moved to Costa Rica, but they were supposed to be in San Francisco. How do I do this? How do I make sure they're fully compliant? We don't have an entity in Costa Rica. Can Elements help? So that's absolutely something that we hear on a regular basis. And because of remote work, employees find that flexibility. They're working for employers around the world. So yeah, we're seeing it quite often, actually.
Caroline, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, we've seen this. We've seen the same, people wanting to go back to home countries or go to a different location because we've moved into a remote world. So although we at Blinkist haven't seen turnover, we could have had turnover if we hadn't have navigated this remote world of, how we manage different payrolls and compliance in different areas. So I would guess it's going to be a high-ish yes.
Okay. Sorry, Rick.
I was going to say, Caroline, do you find that having the requirement of being more flexible with finding talent around the world, allowing your employees to work anywhere in the world, has that also made you a better employer? You're finding better talent because of that?
100% yes. 100% yes. And I think the reason for us especially is that the Berlin startup world is super competitive, and the average tenure of someone in a Berlin startup is 8 months. So what we're able to do is now we've opened up, we can do work from anywhere, which means we can open up our talent pool and attract people from different geographies instead of saying you have to be in this radius of Berlin. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think that from a client perspective, the fact that we're giving that flexibility, I think is why you're actually seeing the employer of record industry kind of boom from that, is that clients don't have to look for talent in their own location where they have an office. They can find talent, as you just indicated, in multiple countries, different locations around the world, but it gives them the flexibility to actually tap into talent that they never would have had before. And because with an employer of record, for example, you're not required to set up an entity, you're not required to do all that registration. The employer of record already has that. Elements has our own entities and operates around the world to support our clients. It really gives that flexibility, one, for speed to find the talent, especially right now when you're looking for talent very quickly for your growth. But I also find that it gives more flexibility in the type of talent that you may have not been able to adapt or attract in the past. So yeah, I've seen that happen quite frequently.
Okay, so we're going to come to the end of the poll. We thank you guys for answering that. We got over the magic number. I always have this magic number I like to get to. So just to let you know, we have 61% yes and 39% said no. Sort of along the lines of what you guys were saying, really. Okay.
Melanie, can I jump into that really quickly? I think that's really interesting. I think it's really important that it's not that just losing talent, it's how to make sure that you're retaining that talent. So I would be interested in, Carolina, how were you able to, if that was to come up, you just said you're not losing talent because you're flexible, but what was your mentality within your organization to ensure that if that was to come up with an employee, that you had a methodology in supporting them wherever they were looking to move?
Yeah, absolutely. So it did come up for us. We had a number of individuals that when we, closed the office with the first wave of restrictions, people started working from home and naturally said, well, a number of people said, well, I'm not from Berlin originally. I'd like to go back to my country of origin, or actually I want to go somewhere else. And the first thing for us, I think, is around well-being and making sure we can support people in the right way, but also making sure that we identify this is the talent that we need to retain. We want to have a really high level of talent density within Blinkist. So if there's somebody that is a top talent, it's a critical role, we really want to retain them, then our approach was right. So it's not, are we going to do it? It's how we're going to do it. So once we identified, yes, we need to retain them, and we then needed to work out a solution of how we approached it. And we had payrolls in 3 countries existing already, but these individuals wanted to go to other countries that we didn't have entities set up in. And so that's when we reached out to Elements and worked with an employer of record to set that up, because the countries, 2 examples are Sweden and Italy. We did not have any knowledge of those labor laws, what the payroll regulations are, how we would be compliant. We had no legal entity, and probably more importantly, we didn't speak either language. So, that's when, to keep that top talent, we've really had to say, how do we work around this, and how do we work in a different way without hiring a whole payroll team in Sweden for one person or in Italy for another person? So for us, we had to kind of experiment and work out how we wanted to do it. But now we've got our process in place so that we can execute that a lot quicker now that we're kind of through the more reactive stage that we were at probably 2 years ago.
And how do you find that that's impacted the overall organization or your strategy within recruiting new talent?
Well, it's opened up our strategy, I think. Prior to COVID, we had an incredibly strong office-based culture, as I know a lot of companies did. So everything around our culture, the comments we had on Glassdoor or what we'd see in engagement surveys were all about the office and the environment in the office and the atmosphere in the office. And so then we were very, very Berlin based. We were completely not, office hours in Berlin. And so what it's done from our recruitment strategy is we've been able to open it right up and say, actually, we want to retain, as I said before, this really high level of talent density. So how do we do that? It means we can go to different geographies, we can go to different regions, and culturally we've become significantly better at working across time zones and working hybrid. So from a talent acquisition strategy, our strategy is now far broader, and we're trying to tap into and access like far more markets, which means we'll get diversity of thought, diversity of background, and hopefully attract like the best people to come and work for Blinkist, not just because they happen to live in Berlin, but because they resonate with our purpose and our vision and where we're going. And also they've got the strongest skill set for it.
And was the result of that, the reason why you're not losing your talent is because you've been able to be a lot more flexible with that?
I think so. I mean, the individuals that we then kind of made arrangements for to work in different areas have chosen to stay with us. And I honestly feel that because we've given them flexibility and we've given to them, then I feel like they have increased commitment and connection to Blinkist and to working with us. And what we hear from people is that actually this remote work from anywhere type environment is a really important part of the value proposition that companies need to be offering now. The fact that I can work for an awesome Berlin-based company and live in the amazing Barcelona, to me, is something that money can't buy. So I think it does become a real selling point for an organization, and a unique selling point, because there are other organizations that are not culturally kind of allowing that as part of how they work.
That's interesting. It's interesting. That's the same feedback we're getting from a lot of our clients as well, that flexibility, the ability that you're able to allow employees to go to different countries. We had another scenario where a client said, well, I have an employee who wants to go home to support their parents, but we want to retain them and they want to continue to work with us. Can we move them to Portugal? And what that looks like, how's that going to impact, supporting them from a cost perspective as well. As you just mentioned, it's more than money can buy, but given the fact that they can be flexible, and it gives you a lot more gravitas around the world as well. I think it's been most beneficial from an impact and retention perspective from employers, because when you're not having that remote ability, we're finding that clients are losing talent because of that. They want to keep them in certain countries, and without that, employees, well, I can go to find another employer who will allow me to do that. So I agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back to 5 years ago when I started working remotely, people said it can't be done, or it's, how are you going to have a connection with people, especially when you work in a people type role? How can you do that remotely? And, I always used to think this is the future of work, is remote and work from anywhere. And actually the pandemic has sort of spin up that process, and now it's far more normalized. And I do think that organizations that don't offer that sort of flexibility are going to struggle in the war for talent, so to speak, to find and retain people. And they do say it's like time is the new currency. And if people work from home, they have more time to be able to be with their families, to be able to exercise, to look after their well-being, to do all these different things. So actually there are pros and cons of that remote setup organizationally that we just have to learn how to navigate.
It's interesting. I read an article the other day that said that employers, we're very keen about bringing employees back to the office. And, I get that there's a cultural component to that as well. There's collaboration that's really important as well. But there's also the component that, during the pandemic, we had to force employees and a culture around the world, we had to force them into remote work. That was something we had to quickly implement. And that dramatically changed kind of the employee experience, the business experience overall. Now that everyone's gotten used to that, we're now trying to shift it back so quickly, which means we're being disruptive again. We're trying to get employees to come back to that, which again, it's another, they've gotten used to that kind of predicament. So one thing that I always recommend is looking at, for employers who want to have that hybrid, to look at how to support remote employees even coming into the office, but also those who are going to come in the office, have some flexibility for them to allow to work from home a couple days a week, have them in the office a couple days a week, but also explain why, not just that you're coming back into the office, but how we're going to make sure that we're having that, that relationship with our employees who are remote and our employees that are in the office and those who are going to have a hybrid component of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been going through that same process. As we've reopened our office, we've been very, very cautious about numbers and restrictions so that we can make sure we can keep everybody safe. But we've always said our approach now is Berlin first, hybrid friendly is our tagline for it. And in the sense that we also want to make sure that we don't have like in and out groups, that actually if you're in the office, you know certain information, and if you're not in the office, you don't. So I think that's something that, like you say, it's another disruption for people, and it's another change that we need to get used to. But it's all kind of learning, and which is why I love these sorts of sessions where we can share ideas, because we're all learning together. We're forced into this like experiment of trying to make this work. And so for me, sharing and speaking to peers in different organizations to learn, what do you do? How have you navigated that? Is, I think, the best way for us all to learn at pace and to try and get the best outcome for the people we work with.
Absolutely. We've got a few questions I'm seeing in the chat. One of them actually is for you, which is, do you set a set limit for employees to go into certain countries before you engage an employer of record? So if an employee says they want to be work in a country for a month or two, do you have that flexibility? And then at what point do you engage an employer of record?
Yeah, so I think this is something that we have been kind of just learning as we go. So depending on the country they're going from and going to, there may be periods of time they can go in and not break tax rules. But one of the first things we are doing is getting advice early on so that we make sure we protect the individual and we protect ourselves. So for example, we have had people that have gone and stayed in different countries within a limit so it doesn't affect their tax situation. But as soon as we know that they intend to stay there for a period of time, we then start entering into, okay, now we need to speak to Elements as our employer of record organization to work out the logistics around this. And I think the important thing is that we stay compliant as an organization and that we provide that expert advice from an employer of record to the individual to make sure they stay compliant as well. But also what we've also learned is that there are certain tax like benefits that individuals can get, like going to different countries. So for example, and I'm by far not a payroll or tax expert at all. So anyone that has knowledge in the Italian system may immediately correct me. That if you're Italian and you left the country and then you go back, you can get a tax break. And actually, it's us having that knowledge from, say, Elements as our employer of records organization, and then helping the employee to get that, so that actually then the employee works from where they want to work. We get to retain them and they get to get the tax benefits that they're entitled to. So it's kind of trying to get that win-win as much as we can. But short answer to the question is, if the tax rules allow, then people can work for short periods of time from other countries.
Do you find with pay adjustments, so if an employee, there's another question in the chat, an employee is moving from one country to another and there's a cost of living difference, doing the same job but a cost of living difference, both to the employee and then the tax liability from an employer perspective, how do you, what's your thought process in how to manage that within your organization?
Yes, that is a very, very good question. And one I'm going to be very open and transparent about, to say it's one we're still trying to figure out. Because obviously, if someone moves from Berlin to a country with a lower cost of living, should we be paying the same? But if someone goes from Berlin to New York, then obviously, or another city with a very higher difference. At the moment, for the three main payrolls we have, which is Spain, the UK, and Berlin, we've done some cost of living comparisons. And if we have a lower pay ranges for Spain, for example, because the cost of living is less than in Berlin. So that's our kind of working experiment at the moment around that, but it's something that we're still learning. And I speak to other people teams and kind of work with them to understand what they do as well.
Yeah, I sat on a panel the other day, and a number of individuals, HCR, chief people officers, were referring to country bans, region bans, based on that as well. That's probably a great practice that we've seen as well. Because you can hire employees all over the place at this particular moment, they're expecting some of the same salary bands for doing the same work. But it makes sense from a business perspective to maybe look at bands, but maybe look at it from a regional perspective, or even a currency perspective. One brought up that in euros, they'll look at their salary bands in euros, they'll look at their salary bands in pounds, they'll maybe look at their salary bands in dollars, and then decide from that based on the region as well. So it's there's no perfect solution for that today, because remote work is still quote unquote the new normal. But it's an approach that we have to kind of test and try it and maybe fail and then come back at it again, because everything's new for everyone, and we don't know how that's going to fall out at the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're very open with, like, internally around this and externally, to say we have, until 2 years ago, we were completely Berlin based. So actually this is all experimentation and learning as we go. And our intentions are very clearly set, that we need to keep the company safe and we want to keep the employees safe. And we want to be as flexible within the limits of what we're legally allowed to do. And if we're learning and processes aren't as smooth as we would like them to be, we try and just be very open and honest about, exactly as you say, Rick, we're all learning as we go. Our intentions are strong. We're working in line with our values, and we're just trying to improve it. And I know that the way we're working now is significantly better than we were 2 years ago when the pandemic first started.
I agree. I think that when we say the new normal, we're trying to figure out what that means, right? The definition for everyone. And that's also regionally and culturally too. What is the new normal for you? It's something that we're figuring out. The world has just gotten smaller for us. And because of that, we're combining different cultures, different aspects of business. So it's something that we're going to continue to have conversations about. What we say today may change in a year from now, just because the world, and again, the new normal is ever evolving. So you get another question. We had a lot of questions coming in. My apologies if we missed some of the questions. So another question that has come up are there, when you're looking for tax advice for different countries, what is your methodology for that? Are you going to your tax accountant? Are you using your employer of record? Are you doing a combination of the two? Kind of what is your methodology, Caroline?
So our methodology would immediately be to use Elements, who are our employer of records, and go straight to them. We also have an internal general counsel who works with us. And for example, in the US, where we've moved into in the last year, we use Elements for payroll. We also have a lawyer from a corporate perspective in the US. So I guess we use a bit of a hybrid way of working, but my first point of call would be, we need to hire someone in the US. Can you take me through what we need to do? How does this work? And we just walk through the steps that we need to go through.
Here's a question here, and I can also answer this one. It's for employees that are working remotely, does their work contract issue from the country's entity? I'll answer that one, and I can support that as well. So from an employer of record perspective, we issue an employment agreement from the country that the employee is working in. That is the most compliant requirement to do, because the employee is working in that country. There's a tax implication for that, and also the employees want to benefit from the benefits they're entitled to in the country. I'll use Spain, for example. Employees are entitled to Social Security. They have certain things like Baja that are tied to those things as well. If you were to issue a contract, for example, out of the UK for an employee in Spain, the employee in Spain would not be able to be entitled to those benefits because their contract would be based on the UK. From an employment law perspective, that can be non-compliant. I know that sometimes I've seen this multiple times where clients have come to us, especially prior to Brexit, who were employing all of their European European employees through the UK, for example. But what ends up happening is that it's fine. You can pay the employee because they were able to go through. You can pay an employee because they were part of the European Union. But it really comes down to the benefits that the employees are entitled to in their home country or where they're actually working. And so it's important that you always issue an employment agreement from the local country from that perspective. And if you don't have an entity in the country, that's where an employer of record like Elements can support, where we have our own entities where we can hire the employer on your behalf. You're still managing the employee on the day-to-day basis, but from a compliance perspective, the benefits that they're entitled to, their employment agreement, the statutory requirements, those are all in place and signed off from a local entity on your behalf.
Do you want me to go on to the next poll?
Yes, that would be great.
Yep. Okay, so we have another poll. It's great that this is so interactive and you guys have got so many questions. So next poll is payroll compliance a part of your company's global recruitment and talent retention strategies? So let's launch this one. Okay, here we go. So we have that magic number that I like to try and get, and everyone's getting onto that. So thank you so much. So Rick and Caroline, what's your thoughts?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It kind of ties to what we were just talking about when it comes to employee benefits. Employees know, especially in countries that they work today, they know what they're entitled to. So not having a strategy that's going to be fully compliant from payroll benefits, even a contract perspective, if it's not fully compliant, an employee will know that. They know the rules and regulations of their countries. And so I find that I just had a conversation the other day with another client, prospect, who said, yeah, we had all our employees sign an offer letter, but we didn't realize we had to do an employment agreement. Now, being American, I understand what that meant. They were saying that they were finding that they were losing talent because they did not know how to explain or were properly putting things in front of the employees in those particular countries. So getting talent is going to be really important. If you don't, if you have all the right ducks in the row, if you have your employment agreement, you have your benefits, your statutory requirements, again, employees know what those are. And if they don't see that, it will cause some concern if this is the employer that they want to work for.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. If you'd have asked me that question a couple of years ago, I probably would have said, well, yeah, I mean, there's not, we're in Berlin. There's not like a great deal of compliance we need to do. We're only running one payroll. But the fact is now is, for example, as I said, we moved into the US as an organization last year and started recruiting people, and actually making sure that not only we offer the employees the right benefits, not just to attract them, but to be compliant is absolutely critical, because it's kind of a complete unknown for us in terms of what the labor laws are in the US around payroll compliance, or in different geographies as well. So I think it absolutely has to be part of our recruitment, and actually part of a broader organizational kind of risk profile, because the implications from a brand and a financial and an employee trust and connection perspective can all be really substantial.
I think that when there was a question that was in the poll that asked about workers' compensation requirements around the world, that's one of them, right? I had a conversation with a client that was actually out of Shanghai that was going into the US as well. And they said, well, I went on Google, and Google said that workers' compensation is not the federal mandate for employees in the US. And as an employer in the US, I said, yeah, but it's a requirement to make sure that you're fully compliant. You want to make sure that you have this insurance in place. So having to explain those things is really important, because you always think about the worst case scenario, right? What happens if an employee slips and falls? What are you going to do? How are you making sure you're covered? And employees talk. So if something happens where you don't have those things in place, employees will, they'll let it be known. And in some cases, like in the US where workers' compensation is mandated and you don't have it, that can be a brand issue as well when they're saying, well, you're an employer and you don't have these things in place. From a global perspective, that's the same thing, making sure employees are in compliance, making sure that you have the insurances that are protecting them as well, and protecting the company. The company doesn't want to take on $1 million claim. That's a cost that you don't want to do. Having these insurances in place around the world is really important, and it makes you a better employer. So,
okay, so I'm going to share the results. You guys know the answer. So it's 76% yes, 13% no, and 12% not sure.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I would love to have had that question like 3 years ago and to see the difference, but it doesn't surprise me. Perfect.
So I actually have, there's a question here about employer of record in Spain, and I can walk through that really quickly. And Lisa, I'm happy to have a conversation with you after the call as well. There's a difference between an employer of record and payroll and what you're licensing from that perspective. How Elements is set up and how Elements has been approved in Spain as an employer of record. We actually had to go through an entire process of that. Looking at 2 legal employers employing an employee in Spain, that is not legal in country, because Spain has the rules and regulations regarding 2 legal employers. Elements mandate on that is that we do not work with employers who have an entity in a given country. And that has come up quite often when they said, oh, we want to put certain employees in on the EOR, and certain employees we're going to keep in and mandate on our own entities. Those are things that we do not work with, and we have to walk through a licensing licensing approval process in Spain to be able to do what we do as an employer of record. But I'm happy to walk through that with you as well. I'm happy to put my contact information after this meeting to kind of walk through what the difference is in employer of record, or what someone may call a global PEO, or what staffing is also in Spain. Happy to walk you through that as well.
Okay, so I think some of this is covered, but the question is, the future of work and the new normal also meant talent pools are opening up. When we think about recruiting, retaining and relocating talent, how does that specifically impact payroll and compliance? Rick, over to you.
Sure. So I think when you're looking at, finding new talent, there has to be an opportunity where employers need to know first off, what type of talent they're looking to go after. I think that's the first and foremost, and finding where that talent can be in that particular market. Traditionally you will see that IT was in India, or in Philippines, or in Pakistan. That's slightly changed recently in the recent years, but looking at kind of understanding what they're doing there. I also then say, look at benchmarking those particular markets when you're going into those things, those particular countries. Retaining the talent that's looking to relocate in there, understanding that where they are at today from a benchmarking perspective and the country that they're going into, what that looks like. And I believe in equality, but equality doesn't always mean equal, if you get what that means. If you're paying someone, for example, a US salary that's now living in India, there's a different lifestyle that employee would live based on that salary. So I think benchmarking is going to be something that's really important to understand where someone's relocating and how you're going to compensate them, and then explaining to the employees why we're making changes from that perspective. I think also looking at partnering with, if it's an employer of record, or talking to your tax accountants to really understand full compliance in that country, to make sure that whatever you're doing there is fully compliant. So I'll give an example. If you are selling merchandise out of that country, that person's relocated to India, for example, and now are retaining or going after clients in India and selling merchandise in that country, and you're manufacturing those things, there's a PE risk that's associated with that you have to think about. And so working through these particular bullet points, I think it's going to be really important to really understand before you just dive in deep. But working with an employer of record or your tax accountants can really support you in implementing those things while you're looking to retain recruit talent.
Yeah, and I think I can't add a lot to your response there, Rick. I think for us, in what the main impact from a payroll and compliance point of view that opening up our talent markets has given us is just the increased complexity of going from running one payroll in Germany to now running multiple payrolls. So we now have payrolls in the US, UK, Spain, Finland, Sweden, Italy, and Greece. I think I've got all of them, and maybe Portugal is going to come as well. So actually for us, it's about how do we make sure we, without massively increasing our people operations team, which runs payroll, how do we make sure we do that in a compliant, in a streamlined, in a scalable way that gives the benefit to the individual, keeps us compliant? And I think that's been the biggest payroll and compliance challenge for us, is actually setting up this new infrastructure and making sure it works for us as an organization, it's compliant, and it means we retain the top talent. So it's kind of a new element to the people strategy that probably we didn't have on our radar necessarily before.
Well, I think you have to look at it. I have to keep saying that we have to think about it's the new normal. So it's new. We have to figure it out. But I always say ask 150 questions and versus not asking any at all. Looking, doing some research, really understanding kind of the impact it's going to be. Remote work is here to stay. That's not going to change. I think what businesses have to look at is what that means for their organization and how they're going to be able to find the best talent around the world from that perspective. An employee, for example, I'll use elements, our own team as well. Traditionally, HR individuals, meaning our internal HR teams, will be set in offices because that is where our people are, right? And that's where we want to make sure that they are, they've got high touch with our staff. We are now bringing on talent. We just hired a generalist out of in a different state in the US, part of our US team, that is remote. We have maybe one other employee in that particular state. But because of our flexibility with remote work, we're able to have that talent not necessarily sit in the office. Now we require the talent to come into the office and make sure they're connected with our people once in a while. But the day-to-day work can be done remotely. And that was something that we ourselves had to figure out for our internal staff, especially HR, from a people strategy, how we were going to support our staff. And it's been working really well. She's phenomenal talent, and she's been really great from that perspective. But it was something that we had to figure out as part of our own new normal, and that adjustment from kind of the old mentality to the new mentality or the new normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And to support us at Blinkist, what we developed is, I know lots of organizations have got these, is a kind of remote playbook of how we work and how we make sure we keep engagement and connection regardless of where people are working. And this was back last year, so it was between one restriction wave and another restriction wave. And I've seen in the chat that people are asking around, like, how do we manage time zones and things like that. And again, in our remote playbook, we gave some advice about this around, I saw one person said, you alternate between different time zones so that sometimes it's early for one person or it's early for another person, and it doesn't necessarily impact people all the time. But especially with our move into the US and the increasing number of colleagues we've got on a time zone that's behind Europe, then we've shifted all of our kind of all hands type events into later into the afternoon, but not too late into the afternoon, because we also know we've got parents in the European time zone that, that finish work a little bit earlier. So it's trying to kind of, again, just experimenting and seeing what works as we're learning how the new normal is going to settle and how it works out. So I think it's just a case of trying different things and seeing what works, and just listening to employees and saying, how does this work for you if we try and do this hybrid, or if we do this all remote, or if we change this meeting to this time? And we just open about, let's experiment, let's work together and see where the best solution lies.
Yeah, I think it's important that I think listening to staff, I think is really important. Actually, I see one of our staff members on the call today right now that actually was one of our employees who actually requested to move to Canarias, for example, from Barcelona. And we didn't have any staff in Canarias, and we said, and Canarias is an island south of Spain, but we they gave us a call and said, this is where I'm at. This is where I've been for the pandemic. Can I be supported? And our answer was immediately yes. We saw the need for that. And guess what? That talent is with us and still with us, been with us for 4 years. And we're super excited about that because we wanted to make sure we retained that type of talent, that level of talent in the organization by just listening to what their needs were too. It's not just about the company. It's about, again, that work-life balance that all us HR professionals are always preaching about from our pulpits. We're making sure that the employees are taken care of from that perspective. I do want to answer Sarah's question really quickly about how do you ensure payroll is compliant? Do you rely on payroll vendors' advice? I would say you have to think about a couple of things. One, our model within elements in how we support our clients, it's not just payroll. Our clients are supported by employment lawyers, an account manager, HR professionals, and payroll. And I will say that sometimes HR and payroll have different opinions on how the law is written. And so we tend to, we have very open and transparent conversations with each other. Sometimes we disagree, and then we come up with a way to support our clients. So it's not, I wouldn't just rely on payroll vendors because sometimes that's what they're thinking from a calculation perspective, but the law sometimes is gray. I think it's looking at working with employment attorneys, looking at your HR professionals that are in that matter, partnering with an employer of record really does help that because we have that in-house and we're looking at it from multiple ways to provide an answer to you. But I wouldn't recommend just relying on payroll vendors because again, it's just one interpretation of the law where you probably want to get a couple versions of that, especially with a lot of the new laws that are coming in place. And Lisa, I'm happy to send you that information and we'll connect after this call. When we're looking at, again, structure, I think I'm going to get back to the new normal. I know, Melanie, our next question is about culture. So why don't we jump into that? Because the new normal and culture, I think is really important in how remote work has actually impacted the overall business culture or office culture that was once there established before COVID. So Caroline, I'd love to hear what you feel like what you're gaining and what you're also losing in that matter. I think that's the elephant in the room. What are we also losing with remote work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think initially when we went into the kind of like forced remote work where we really had to pivot like very, very quickly, I think there was an immediate sense of what have we lost? We've lost this office culture. We've lost those moments of serendipity when you bump into somebody and you start talking about either something personal or something work related and you lose that connectivity between people. And I think that's what's come through most heavily, certainly at Blinkist, that we've lost that connection and that physical being together as an organization. And I think the other big loss of this flex culture has been a culture of loneliness for some people as well, like especially if people haven't chosen to work remotely or by themselves and it's circumstantially driven, as it has been with the pandemic, then it can be really lonely for somebody to not make that choice. And therefore it's absolutely a big focus on well-being. And at Blinkist, we put in place a lot of additional well-being initiatives around mental health, physical health, and like rest, advice on how to like take time away from your screen as well. Because I think we've also lost with this flex culture, the divide between work and home. I don't know about anybody else, but when I'm working from home, sometimes I forget the time and I don't, and then I realize it's super late and I haven't shut my laptop because I haven't had that kind of trigger to think I need to go home now. But I also, being a remote worker pre-pandemic as well, I also do think there are massive gains from the flex culture. One of those is just, I think if people offer a flexible culture, then people can then work from different locations. And if other employers aren't offering it, then it does become this real connection and this commitment that you have to the organization. And I do believe that people, can broaden their mind by working in different places and working with different people from different backgrounds. So there's certainly a lot of gains that I think we've had as well.
Yeah, I agree to that 100%. I think that you have to, one thing that we've done in our budget for this year is we looked at, we've got offices around the world, but we do have what we call regional offices, and we want to make sure that those teams are able to connect. So in our budget, we put together travel. We expect individuals to travel, if it's semi-annually or every quarter, to those offices to connect from a cultural perspective, because I think that's the one thing you may have lost. There's only so much you can do on Zoom or Teams, this from a connection perspective, but making sure that we have that. We did fly out in December a significant amount of our staff to our holiday party in Chicago, and that connection, when they left the holiday party, they had built some foundational pieces that they maybe not had when over Teams or Zoom. One thing we're looking at is making sure we do that on a regional basis. So how to get people to come to offices, how do we connect people? So it's not every day, especially those employees who are remote, but that way they don't feel like they're on an island, because once they build that connection, that 3 or 4 days that they're connected and they're together and collaborating, it does wonders from that. So I think that although you're losing it so much with so many remote staff, you can gain it back by doing little moves like this, like getting people into the office on a quarterly or semi-annual basis.
Yeah, we do exactly the same, Rick. And next week actually will be my monthly trip to Berlin. And I look forward to it so much, because just building that connection, I have such a packed agenda, but it then means that I have that physical connection with everybody, and I'm listening to what's going on in the office, and I'm like understanding and I'm feeling and seeing what's going on. But also then I can take myself out of it and live and work from where I want to live and work from where my family are. So I definitely agree. It's having these different touch points that we can put in place where we can have those connections and we can form that sense of belonging as well.
Great. I'm going to jump in a couple questions here. Kelly, you had asked, are there any recommendations for reach compliance for pre-existing international employees? We have found that EORs will help build compliance once with a contract, but prior to that, they're not. So to answer that question, a good partner from my perspective, an EOR, we should be partnering with you guys on that. If it's back taxes or benefits, we've done that on our end for multiple clients. Actually, I just did this with one of our other clients the other day, where they had an employee in a country that they found out that they shouldn't have had as a contractor, and how to back bill that and how to get that corrected. So you should be working, Kelly, with a individual company that should be able to walk you through that process. We at Elements do that and do support that, and we've done that multiple times. So I would love to see how we can probably partner with you on that and answer any questions where you have some non-compliance issues that you need to correct from a backdating perspective. Getting back into, there's a question here from Simon that says, it's difficult to find about cultural differences in the world, as in the UK, it's treated as a taboo subject. What do you think about that, Caroline?
Yeah, I mean, I think we haven't experienced that probably quite so much at Blinkist yet. But I think, yeah, I understand your question, Simon, and how we would find out about it. I think it's probably one of the things, again, that we would lean on an EOR to help us with, because in terms of what are the ways of working, what do we need to be mindful of, not just from a compliance point of view, but the unspoken and the implied ways of working, or behaviors or codes of conduct that we need to be aware of. So I think that for me would be part of one of the things that I would be asking an EOR to say, take us through what the compliance parts are, but also what are the parts that we don't know about culturally that we may need to be very mindful and respectful of.
Yeah, I think cultural nuances are really important, right? I think that's something we sometimes don't factor into culture, especially with remote work. What's the norm? What was the norm they came from, and how to transition that into this? So yeah, I think that's where, Simon, again, we can partner with you and kind of look at that. We do some cultural training within our organization, and really help clients really understand the differences between their home country and where you're looking to put remote employees as well. Happy to walk you through that.
So Rick, we're coming towards the end of our time, but we have a few more questions. Did you want to answer a few more questions, or?
Yeah, I can continue to go down the list.
Sorry, So interactive, so many great questions. Thank you.
Yeah, these are really great. It's great to always be part of an interactive webinar. So by the way, if we miss any of them, our contact information will be shared. Feel free to reach out to myself or Caroline or Melanie. We're happy to walk through that and kind of put you guys in the right direction. So if we miss your question, we apologize in advance, but we're going to try to go through them pretty quickly. So Mark, you have my understanding that an EOR owns payroll from E to Z. ETE, excuse me. How often do you align with standards, inputs, outputs, including business reporting? Mark, one thing that we have to do is we are the employer. So the way that our solution works is that we aggregate all of our clients in a given country into our own payroll. Now, we do have our platform that does do reporting for you. So you're able to, for your employees in the countries that we're supporting you in, you're able to have reporting and the requirements that you need. Sometimes within our platform, our clients are going to require custom reporting and outputs. We can do that within our system. We have a phenomenal HCM platform that we've built ourselves, but we're able to walk through that, kind of what your requirements are, and to kind of help kind of customize that for you for your needs. But that's something we will probably have to scope out if it's a little bit above and beyond what our system does, but we do have custom availability to do that. When it comes to the next question, when we're looking at, do you work with privacy terms to ensure data privacy impact assessments will colleagues take work remotely? We do have it, and I'll use for European perspective, we do have GDPR review and a team that does that within our organization. It's actually outlined in our contracts, but we do work with our clients to ensure compliance with data privacy, not just with GDPR, which I think is a term that we tend to use globally. GDPR is specifically just for Europe, but every other countries do have certain terms and conditions regarding privacy and data privacy rules and regulations as well. We would work with you guys to ensure that we're fully compliant with that, and that you're fully compliant with that, and that's outlined within our MSAs and our terms and conditions, but not just in the contract, but really understanding what that means in that country and how data is actually going to flow through, if it's our system or your system, and what information needs to be approved by the employee to do so. So we would partner with you guys on that from that perspective.
So Rick, we have so many questions coming through. So this is up to you because we're slightly over time. So I'll go with what you want to do. But we will have a note. So if you do have questions, keep asking them just over this couple of minutes, because I can send them on to Rick and his team, and then they can come back to your Caroline as well. Because Caroline, you've had quite a few questions as well that we may have missed. So Rick, entirely up to you. Did you want to answer any more or?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I've got a few more that I'm looking at right now that I'm happy to answer to. And again, happy to, if I miss a question, happy to jump on another conference call or an email. Again, our contact information will be shared after the call. And the reason why I want to answer this question, this is a really common question. I think it's really important. Anything around PE risk and EOR model in our views. So PE risk, I always go with a rule of 3. One, do you have an employee in that or contractor employee in that country? Are you selling to clients or billing from that country? Or 3, are you exporting something out of that country? Those are really my rule of 3 for PE risk. With employer of record, we take on the employer component of that. So you would not have an employee from a contract perspective, the employee signs the contract with Elements and our local entity. What's even furthermore important about that, Elements does not outsource that to third parties. Elements is the actual employer. So the way that our contracts work is that the employee is an employee of ours, and they are set up almost like a consultant to your organization, but they are fully the employee of Elements. Then they work with you guys from a day-to-day perspective. We've seen that mitigate PE risk for many of our clients. Now, where that doesn't is where if you are starting to have to bill or create VAT risk in a given country, so if you're billing in that country and collecting income in that country and not billing from maybe like the US or a different country, that could create that. You also have to look at the restrictions between both countries. So where your headquarters are at and the country that you're putting an employee in, you will have to decide, you have to review that to see if there's any risk behind that. But the employer of record component really does mitigate PE risk, especially when you're looking just to put one person or two people or maybe even 10 people in a given country, because you don't have an actual employee from that perspective. And again, I'm happy to walk through that process with you guys a little bit more and based on your overall solution. When a client transitions from EOR to an entity-based payroll, can you transition an employee into their payroll? Absolutely. That's actually a very simple process that we tend to walk through with our clients. We would have to look at what you mean by transition. Some countries do not allow you just to take over the contract. Some countries require us to terminate the employee directly, but it is on a country by country basis. And there's ways to mitigate some of that risk that we will be able to walk through with you on how to make sure that's cost effective for the company and seamless for the employee. But to transition the employee from EOR is seamless. Although we would love to keep you as long as we can, we understand that at what point there's a requirement for you to transition those employees. So happy to walk through that with you guys at any time. And Melody, I think that was all the questions that I've seen here.
Wow, that's great going. I think this is one of the most interactive webinars we've ever had. So thank you so much, Caroline and Rick. As I said, we will send Rick all the questions. So if we have missed anything, then Rick and his team can come back and obviously we'll share those with you, Caroline, as well. We have a white paper that we're releasing, which we're really excited about. We've worked with Rick and his team, and that's going to be released on Monday. So we will send the link out to everyone so that you can download the white paper, which is covering similar subjects as of today, and it will have so much information that you guys will really enjoy reading, I'm sure. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Caroline and Rick, for presenting today. What a great webinar and so much information. Some people have asked, is this being recorded? So if you missed my message right at the beginning, it's being recorded. It will be shared with you all within 24 hours. So if there's anything you've missed, you can re-watch it or share with your colleagues. So thank you all, and thank you, Rick and Caroline.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and we're looking forward to partnering with anyone that has any additional questions.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.